The city was alive with its usual chaos. Horns blaring, conversations spilling into the air from cafe tables, footsteps echoing against pavement wet from a morning drizzle. To most people, it was just another Thursday, but for Ethan, mornings meant more than just coffee and routine. They meant her. Ethan lived on the fourth floor of a modest apartment building on Parker Street, his window facing directly across to another building of similar height. And every morning, as he sat with his cup of black coffee, laptop open but work neglected, his gaze drifted inevitably across the street. There, in the opposite window, framed by cream curtains, lived a woman. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew her rhythms, her unspoken presence, the fragments of her life he collected like pieces of a puzzle. At 7:30 sharp, her light flicked on. A silhouette would move about, sometimes dancing clumsily to music he couldn't hear, sometimes stretching with sleepy grace. She often wore oversized sweaters, her hair tied in a messy bun, and she always opened the window just a little, as though she too liked to greet the city before the day swallowed her whole. Ethan had never spoken to her, not once, but in a strange, silent way, she had become part of his life. He knew that she loved plants. Her windowsill was crowded with them, tiny jungles of green stretching toward the light. He knew that on Sundays, she sat by the glass with a book in hand, her face soft with concentration, pausing only to sip from a chipped blue mug. He knew that sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she laughed at her own thoughts. Head thrown back, eyes sparkled with joy he could feel even from across the street. And maybe that was the dangerous part. Ethan did watch, not obsessively, not intrusively, but enough that his mornings felt incomplete without her presence. Her window was like another screen in his apartment, but unlike his computer or his phone, it was one that breathed warmth and mystery. That morning, as he sipped his coffee, she appeared again, lifting her blinds and stepping into the golden wash of sunlight that spilled into her apartment. She was wearing a loose white shirt and jeans, her hair down this time, catching the light like strands of honey. And then something unusual happened. She looked up, her gaze, usually directed inward to her plants or downward to her book, flicked across the street and landed directly on him. Ethan froze mid-sip, his coffee dangerously close to spilling. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked through the glass, across the invisible line that always separated them. And she smiled, not a polite, accidental smile, a knowing smile, one that acknowledged a quiet familiarity between them. Ethan's heart thudded painfully. He managed a small nod, his lips twitching into a nervous smile of his own. And then, just as quickly, she lowered her blinds halfway, as though embarrassed by her own boldness. But it was too late. That single glance had changed everything. Ethan couldn't focus on work that day. The spreadsheets blurred before his eyes. The emails piled up unanswered. His mind kept replaying that fleeting moment. The way her eyes had lingered, the curve of her smile, the sudden electricity that pulsed through the morning air. For months, he had been living in silent observation. But now, it felt like the silence had been broken. That evening, he sat by his window again, restless. The city outside was shifting into night, neon signs buzzing to life, headlights streaking across the wet roads. He saw her apartment light flick on, faint and warm against the darkening sky. And then, something extraordinary happened. She pulled out a notebook, tore a page, and held up against the glass. Ethan leaned forward, squinting, his breath catching in his throat. The paper read, "Hi." Simple, direct, the kind of word that could crumble walls built over months. Ethan's hands scrambled for a pen, for paper, anything. His fingers shook as he scribbled back, tore the page from his notebook, and pressed it against his own window. "Hi." Across the street, she grinned. She scribbled again, quickly this time. "I see you every morning." Ethan laughed nervously to himself. He wrote back, "I see you too." She pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh. The glow of her apartment framed her like a painting, and Ethan thought he had never seen someone look so alive. Another note went up. "I'm Lily." The name hit him like music. "Lily." He scrawled back, "Ethan." And just like that, the silence was replaced with words. Not spoken, not heard, but written and shared, fluttering against the glass as the city moved on around them. For the next hour, they exchanged pages like children discovering a secret game. She asked about his work. He asked about her plants. She admitted she couldn't keep succulents alive despite trying. He confessed that he was a terrible cook, surviving mostly on takeout. It was clumsy, funny, a little ridiculous, but it was real. Eventually, she held up a final note for the night. Same time tomorrow? Ethan's chest tightened, warmth spreading through him. He nodded eagerly and pressed his reply to the glass. Absolutely. And then her blinds closed, her light dimmed, and Ethan was left staring at the reflection of his own stupidly happy grin in the window pane. That night, as he lay in bed, the city humming outside his window, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, not just for tomorrow, but for every day after. Because sometimes, love didn't begin with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it began with a window and a word, hi. The next morning, Ethan woke earlier than usual. He barely slept, his mind replaying every smile, every word Lily had written the night before. The city outside was gray with clouds, the streets slick from a light drizzle. But to Ethan, the day carried a quiet brightness. He brewed his coffee, sat at his usual spot by the window, and waited. At exactly 7:30, Lily's blinds lifted halfway. She stood there in a navy sweater, her hair tied back, holding a piece of paper already prepared. She smiled when she saw him waiting. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like the world was in perfect rhythm. She pressed her note to the glass. Did you dream? Ethan laughed, fumbling with his pen. Barely. Too excited for this. She tilted her head, biting back a grin, then held up a new note. Me too. And just like that, their ritual began. Over the next week, their conversations grew richer. Ethan learned that Lily was a freelance illustrator, working from home. She showed him one of her drawings pressed against the glass, a delicate sketch of her windowsill plants, leaves curling with soft detail. Ethan applauded, writing, "That's incredible." She shrugged, embarrassed, then scribbled back, "It's what I love. I get lost in it." In turn, Ethan told her about his job in marketing, how it paid the bills but drained his spirit. "I spend more time staring at numbers than living," he admitted. Lily nodded in understanding, her expression soft. Their notes weren't always deep. Sometimes they were silly. She confessed her irrational fear of pigeons. He admitted he had never learned how to whistle. She teased him about the old coffee mug he always used, the one with a chipped rim. He teased her back about her endless parade of oversized sweaters. And yet, between the jokes and small confessions, something more profound pulsed beneath the surface. One night, after another exchange of notes, Ethan lingered at his window, not wanting to let go. Across the street, Lily hesitated too, her blind half closed, her face faintly lit by her lamp. Then she held up a note that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Ethan stared at the words, his throat tightening. He thought of the quiet meals eaten alone, the empty weekends, the way he had watched her for months without speaking because he didn't know how. He wrote carefully, his hands shaking. Every day, until now. When Lily read it, she pressed a note to her chest and looked away for a moment, her eyes shining even from across the distance. She didn't write anything else that night, but she didn't close her blinds either. She simply sat there by her window, and Ethan did the same, two souls sharing silence across the street. Days turned into weeks. Their note exchanges became the highlight of Ethan's life. His mornings felt brighter, his evenings warmer. Even his work seemed less heavy, because now he had someone to look forward to, but with closeness came questions. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan decided to be bold. He scribbled a note in hurried handwriting. "We should meet." He pressed it to the glass, heart racing. Lily froze. Her smile faltered slightly as she read it. She didn't write back immediately. She tapped her pen against her lips, her brow furrowed in thought. Finally, she lifted a paper. "I don't know if that's a good idea." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He quickly scribbled back. "Why not?" Lily hesitated, chewing her lip, then held up her reply. What if this breaks it? What if we're better like this, safe, simple? Ethan stared at her note, his chest tightening. He understood her fear. Their connection was pure, fragile, untouched by the messiness of the real world. What if meeting face to face shattered it? Still, he couldn't ignore the growing ache in his chest, the need to know her not just through glass and paper, but through presence, through voice. He wrote back, "But what if it makes it stronger?" Lily didn't respond immediately. She pressed her forehead against a window, closing her eyes for a long moment. Finally, she lifted a smaller note. "I need time." Ethan nodded silently, even though she couldn't hear him. He lifted his own note. "I'll wait." The following days carried a strange weight. Their exchanges continued, but they were lighter, cautious. Lily smiled, but Ethan could see the hesitancy in her eyes. She told him about her work deadlines, about her love for thunderstorms, about the stray cat that sometimes perched on her fire escape. Ethan listened, laughed, responded. But in the back of his mind, the question lingered. Would they ever cross the street between them? One evening, as rain drummed softly against the windows, Lily lifted a note that surprised him. "Do you believe in fate?" Ethan's pen hovered over his paper. He thought of how many mornings he had sat at his window, how many times he had watched her without knowing her name, how a single smile had changed everything. He wrote, "I didn't, until you." Lily read it, and slowly she smiled. A real smile this time, soft, unguarded, filled with something he hadn't seen in days. She scribbled back quickly, pressing the note firmly against the glass. "Tomorrow, same time, don't bring paper." Ethan's heart leapt. His hand shook as he wrote one last word for the night. "Yes." Lily laughed through the glass, her eyes shining, before lowering her blinds. For the first time since they had begun their paper note romance, Ethan sat in the quiet with his heart thundering. Tomorrow wasn't just another day. It was the day everything could change. The next morning, Ethan woke with a knot in his stomach. The city outside seemed louder, brighter, more alive than ever, as though it too knew something was about to change. He moved through his apartment in a daze, shaving carefully, choosing his best shirt, brewing coffee he was too jittery to drink. For months, his life had been measured in glances and notes through glass. Today, those fragile pages were gone. Today, he would see Lily, not as a distant figure framed by her window, but as a woman standing close enough to touch. At exactly 7:30, Ethan sat at a spot by the window, heart pounding. Her blinds lifted. There she was, in a soft gray sweater, her hair falling in waves around her shoulders. She looked across the street, their eyes locking, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lily smiled. Not the cautious smile of someone holding back, but one full of nervous excitement. She raised her hand and pointed downward toward the street below. Ethan swallowed hard, nodded, and grabbed his jacket. The city felt different as he stepped outside, like every sound and color had sharpened. Cars whooshed past. The smell of fresh bread wafted from a bakery on the corner. A cyclist rang his bell. Ethan barely noticed any of it. His entire focus was the opposite sidewalk. And there she was. Lily stood under the awning of her building, her hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. Ethan's breath caught. She was real, not a reflection, not a note, not a dream. Real. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, almost in sync, they stepped off their curbs and crossed the street. When they stopped in front of each other, the world seemed to fall away. "Hi," Ethan said softly, his voice rough from nerves. Lily's lips curved into the smallest, sweetest smile. "Hi." It was the same word they had started with, scribbled on paper through glass. But spoken aloud, it felt infinitely bigger. For a moment, they just stood there, laughing nervously at the absurdity of it all. Months of silent communication, endless notes, countless shared moments, and now they were finally here, face to face. "You're taller than I thought," Lily said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "And you're—" Ethan searched for the right word, but everything felt too small. Beautiful? Brilliant? None of it captured what he felt. "Exactly how I hoped you'd be." Her cheeks flushed, and for a heartbeat, she looked down shyly. Then she met his gaze again, steady this time. "So, what now?" "We've broken the rules. No more paper. No more glass." Ethan took a breath, his heart pounding. "Now we see if it's real." They walked together down the street, their steps hesitant at first, but soon falling into rhythm. They stopped at the cafe on the corner, one both of them had seen countless times from their windows but had never visited. The barista greeted them warmly, oblivious to the fact that this was the first chapter of something new. Over coffee, the conversation flowed in fits and starts. They talked about their favorite books, their favorite songs, the little quirks they had never written on paper. Ethan learned that Lily hummed when she drew, that she loved thunderstorms but hated the smell of bleach, that she collected postcards from places she had never been. Lily learned that Ethan once dreamed of being a writer, that he hated olives with a passion, that he secretly loved old black and white films. At times, their words stumbled, silences stretched. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And every time their eyes met, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like a continuation of every note they had ever written. As the hours slipped by, the city outside moved on. People rushing to work, buses sigh at their stops, children tugging at their parents' hands. But inside that little cafe, time felt slower, softer. When they finally stepped back out into the street, Lily looked up at Ethan with a smile that made his chest ache. "You know," she said, "I was scared. I thought maybe it would all fall apart once we actually met. That maybe we were better behind glass." Ethan shook his head. "I was scared too. But this is better. So much better." Lily's eyes softened, and for a moment, she just looked at him, as if memorizing his face, as if anchoring herself in the reality of him. Then she laughed lightly, almost to herself. "What?" Ethan asked, smiling. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice playful. "All this time, we could have just crossed the street." Ethan laughed too, the sound bubbling out of him like relief. "Yeah, but maybe it had to happen this way, one note at a time." They stood there in the middle of Parker Street, cars honking around them, people weaving past. But for Ethan and Lily, the world narrowed to two people who had finally crossed more than just a road. They had crossed into each other's lives. That night, as Ethan sat by his window, he looked across the street out of habit. Lily's blinds were open, her apartment light spilling into the night. But instead of holding up a note, she leaned out slightly, caught his eye, and waved. Ethan waved back, grinning like a fool. No more paper, no more glass, just them, and a love that had begun with nothing more than a glance. No more paper, no more glass, just them, and a love that had begun with nothing more than a glance. If you enjoyed Love Across the Street, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves heartwarming stories. Your support helps us bring more beautiful love stories to life. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. And tell us in the comments, do you believe love can begin with just a glance?